profit margin is supposed to be for a
3, 2,
publicly traded
1,
company, or what fiduciary responsibility is when they criticize a publicly traded company for doing things in the best interest of the board members, right? We can talk about that. We can talk about how people get upset about how, like, why is a senator paid $80 an hour and a McDonald's worker is $10 an hour? But it's an essential work. It needs an essential wage. Like, oh, well, where do wages come from? Like, what do you even mean by that? I mean, like, so there's like two popular examples of some historical stories. We can talk about like wages or the value of labor, or whatever. Like, I don't know, whatever. Literally, almost any single topic that lefties like have to splurge about online is just hilariously underinformed.
Value of labor sounds interesting, but before we do that, let's go to Dr. K. Then we'll go back to Puller because Puller seems to have some examples as well. So Dr. K, then Puller.
I mean, what am I supposed to say to that? Like, if you look hard enough online, you can find an idiot for everything, right? Like, we live in a golden age of opportunity where if you want a dumbass, boy howdy, you can have one on your doorstep in 5 fucking minutes on Discord, on Twitter, on any fucking platform you want, right? Like, you know, finding a moron ain't fucking that hard. That said, you know, I would say that a lot of people who come to the left wing, you know, you have ideological thought leaders, and then you have people who simply understand that they kind of believe this argument and then just kind of follow along with it, right? People who are looking around them and saying,
Oh, that was
hey,
bad.
you know, the systems that be are kind of fucked and working against me. So I believe that there should
If I placed that faster, I would probably
you
say,
know,
like,
they don't
maybe
really research too
maybe I should
deeply into what
reset.
that change is. They just simply believe that there does need to be this fundamental change in the
I don't
system
know.
because, you know, it's very
Let's see if I
easy to
can-
understand something is wrong with you. It is much harder to, you know, be able to prescribe the exact solution to what that is that's wrong, right? And as far as, like, you know, I don't know, that little bullshit, like, jab at like, minimum wage thing, it's like, yeah, minimum wage does need to be higher, but that's neither here nor there. And, like, you know, if this is a thing that bothers you, Steve, so much, right, like, you know, you're kind of in the similar part of the world as me, like, you could organize within your community and actually push for policy you want to see rather than lefties who are kind of on an upswing right now.
So I mean, I have like a different problem with this, which is that like lefty discourse.
Wait, do I what? Wait, what?
Wait, what?
What?
I don't know. I've been organizing in LA for some time now, and I haven't seen you be doing much of nothing.
I don't organize in LA. That's not where I'm from. I organize in Georgia, and I'm organizing in Omaha.
But you live in LA, don't you?
Whatever happened in Georgia?
Yeah, what happened in Georgia again? What was that?
Nothing. Nothing's ever happened.
Yeah, nothing happened there. Yeah.
Does my dude live in LA though?
Let's go to Puller, who's been waiting.
This isn't.
Yeah, so I would also say that, like, I would apply that same critique of capital markets, specifically labor, and then how firms gain capital when it comes to the prescriptive solutions of a lot of leftists. But I can think of specific leftists that I know that have easily been able to address these things. They're informed in this aspect. And then secondly, when it comes to like the difference between when it comes to like the way that a lot of leftists see economic policy, like looking at the actual economic policy and then making like a moral judgment about that, rather than the outcome of that like economic policy. And that's what kind of bothers me a little bit. But like those are the two main things that I necessarily like hold that a lot of leftists online have issues with.
Okay, that moral judgment thing's interesting. Go ahead, Vivian, and then Socrates.
Sure, yeah. So Stephen has, in all fairness, like, organised a lot more than quite a few of the fucking, like, dipshit theory bro fucking communists on this platform. Like, he's leveraged this platform to try and affect some degree of political change, and, like, although, like, we don't agree on a lot of things, like, I have mad respect for, like, using your platform in that way, and I wish a lot of, like, larger left-wing content creators would do that.
I was under
not,
the
like,
false assumption he was an Angelino, sorry.
Yeah, that's not like fucking saying that anybody here who's done activism, like your activism is bullshit. I'm just saying that if you have a large online platform and you like preach leftism in general, you should probably be leveraging that large online platform towards like leftist causes. But in opposition to Stephen, I would say like you don't have to be a fucking expert in economics to consider yourself a leftist. Like,
Yeah, the problem isn't being an expert in economics. My problem is just that, like, all of the criticisms just end up being worthless and meaningless. It reminds me of Occupy Wall Street, where you've got people that are screeching online about how, like, corporations aren't people. What do you mean by that? Like when all of the criticism just
aren't.
doesn't make sense, but they are and they need to be. Didn't you say you published in the field? I guess econ is in finance, but they like the fact that people have all of these pointed criticisms that point at nothing and have no like reflection of like what actually needs to be changed, or more importantly, what would actually.
Why do
help
they need
people.
to be people?
Corporations need to be people because they need to be able to own property and they need to be able to represent themselves in court. You want to be able to take a corporation to law if they wrong you. You can't take the individual owners of said corporation. That wouldn't make any sense.
So
Corporations also are people that just
before
pay
they were
liability
considered
insurance funds.
people, before they were considered people, they just didn't have property, I guess, huh? Like,
What do you mean by considered people?
like before the Citizens United and all that sort of ruling like came out, like clearly corporations didn't have property before that point.
All I know is that in a legal sense, a corporation needs to exist as a separate legal entity because it's the way that our taxes.
Yeah,
are
a separate
organized.
legal entity, not as a human being. Though.
A corporation is not seen as a human being.
But yeah, they're a separate entity. It's not like they're given like
You see, this type of misinformation is exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's such a worthless criticism because all it does is it misleads
Get
people.
fucking
Nobody even
pissed
knows
going here.
what the conversation should even be about.
We've got
And
pissed
then
on the chat. Let's fucking tell us. Okay. Is a corporation a person according to Constitution?
It's a legal
United?
person, but it's not like they have like medical rights or they don't have like.
Well, so they have like First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
That's like the relevant
That's
thing.
That's
Right.
Citizens United. Yeah, that doesn't
Right.
like that. That specifically somewhat
And
refers
that's,
to.
it's like,
United didn't
okay, so
establish
we can all
corporate
recognize it's like a little bit strange that a corporation can spend unlimited money on like advertising for some political cause. Like we can all recognize like slightly
can we?
strange. Well, okay, so
Do you want? We can argue Citizens United if you want. I'm very confident that nobody has a good argument against Citizens United. If you want to do that one,
Against
kinda
Citizens
strange.
United?
That's my entire argument.
Unlimited paying like into super PACs like to run fucking shadow campaigns for fucking Newt
Well,
Gingrich
Wait,
kind of
wait,
shit.
wait, wait.
here's a okay. Here's a super
Wait,
simple question,
wait,
everybody.
I
Here.
would make that exact argument.
I'd love to hear your guys. So let's say that I want to make a documentary about climate change, and let's say that I want to advertise for that climate change documentary, but it's like 30 days before some election. Should the federal government tell me that I'm not allowed to advertise that documentary?
Okay, so we can
That's unrelated.
recognize.
That's
Wait,
completely
wait,
related. No, no, no.
Very
That's
related.
completely
We can
related.
recognize different types of things, right? So we can recognize as people that like a fossil fuel corporation spending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on like anti-fossil fuel propaganda is fundamentally different from a group of people who are individual citizens getting together to form a pack to produce some kind of advertisement that says global warming is a bad thing, right? Like we can recognize truth, we can recognize varying amounts of like individual citizens, right? Like these
Sure.
are.
All I'm asking is,
I'm not saying that we can draw like an exact line. I'm just saying.
yeah,
we
but
can
the problem is
recognize
I don't know
some
where
degree
that
of
line would be anywhere. If you wanted to fund some sort of documentary, you can argue that literally anything you make can be political in nature. It could be a documentary about gun violence.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea that the
It
federal
seems
government
like a
could say-
weird thing that you would have to cut at some exact point.
Well,
That's,
it
like,
is cut
not
at an
obvious,
exact point.
like-
You can't directly corroborate
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
collaborate with a person's campaign. That's what does ever seem like a pack of a super PAC, right?
Yep.
The super PAC doesn't have reporting abilities, or they're not supposed to work hand in hand with another campaign. That's what
It would be some arbitrary line that you would draw that you would say this is like the number of millions of dollars compared to the number of people. You have some weird ratio that you draw between number of
Sure,
people
but I'm just saying, like, so in the case of, so in the exact
It'd
case
be kind of arbitrary.
in the exact case of Citizens United, it was a conservative nonprofit entity that wanted to advertise a film that was critical of Hillary Clinton. Now, I actually I haven't seen the particular film, and I'm sure the film is filled with a lot of bullshit, but are we comfortable with the federal government coming in and saying, hold on, you're not allowed to do that because it's going to interfere with an election?
Wait,
Yes, I'm fine with
think,
that.
I think like the federal government is a red herring. It's a question of whether like this hurts or helps our democracy, right?
That's not the global.
Corporations need to stay out of politics. Plain and simple.
The federal government's role is critical here because that's the basis of the striking down of the law is because the First Amendment is a protection from government influence, and of course that applies to the federal government. So, I mean, in that particular case, the nonprofit was taking corporate money purposely because nonprofits generally had an exclusion under the law, but they did that precisely to challenge the law in question. And what Destiny is talking about, I think, are some of the hard lines that need to be drawn. And how could you ever draw a line that says something like for-profit corporations don't have a right to spend money as a way of expression, but unions do? In fact, unions were not
Unions
allowed
should be
under
able
the
to
law.
spend money on politics. Corporations should not. Plain and simple.
Okay, but the
That's
law,
my stance.
just so you know, the Citizens Unit, the law in question, the BRCA, affected both unions and for-profit corporations equally.
But
And they were
that's
struck down
the
for
thing
both.
though, is there's no union, not even the AFL-CIO, that's ever going to be able to match like some of these large fucking corporations. They're going to be able to show up.
I think
know
you're
that, plain
overstating
simple.
also the role of corporations in politics. I mean,
Is it that you think unions are more democratic and that like corporations are inherently undemocratic?
they're not inherently undemocratic, and the corporation rule was without regard to size. It was any for-profit corporation. And also, I don't know, it's really difficult to say that, unions are just generally more democratic than corporations.
No,
what is it basically?
I'm with Sanders on this one. Like, fucking Citizens United has been a fucking disaster for our.
But it also hasn't
for our
because
democracy.
our markets for communications related elections are so saturated anyway. First of all, a lot of corporations just don't want to get into the ring of throwing money in terms of they'll throw a lot of money in lobbying. But they won't do it for
Pisco,
election
do you know
communications.
about Prop 22 here in California?
I don't know anything about California
know.
state law or proposition.
Basically, Uber managed to buy a law into effect.
That's lobbying,
by,
right?
By putting out so much money for a disinformation campaign that
But that's
most
not election communication. That's
This was
lobbying.
a referendum on whether or not you wanted to outlaw Uber in California. You think the majority
it was
of
not
people in
to outlaw.
California-
It was about the
outlaw?
status of the driver
You
that
were to make them. You were to make W2
contractor law.
Yes, if you were to make Uber drivers W2 employees, one, you would probably hurt the driver because they wouldn't be able to work for parallel companies, and two, it would just disappear as a service. It wouldn't be tenable. You couldn't afford it.
That's also
Uber
not what
isn't
the law
profitable
did.
as it
That's
is.
not what the
Held
law
up
did.
already.
But Dr. K, do you think that corporations should have no political stake in lobbying? Because this is different, right? One is lobbying, the other is electoral
Listen,
communication.
Lobbying, I don't like it. I think that that shouldn't be a thing either. Honestly, if I could, I would see every corporation out of politics.
Media
like,
corporations. Are you going to ban a newspaper from publishing things related to the election?
Or YouTubers or Twitch streamers from talking about politics online.
The
You're
media
not a
corporations want-
corporation, dude.
by
Yeah, come on.
I am actually. I'm a small corporation. I filed my
You
LLC.
yourself are not a corporation,
No,
Mr.
but Destiny
T.
LLC
Take a
is
deep.
what is partnered with Twitch.
He's an agent of the corporation.
Listen, technically, I have a corporation. Like, I'm technically incorporated as I have a non-profit. Like,
Well, Dr. K, answer
Yeah.
the question. So
I don't-
all of our like established First Amendment laws, like the New York Times and Sullivan, these are cases involving corporations.
I do not want corporations running dark money campaigns like through super PACs.
Well, they're not. I mean, the evidence is that
They
the parties
are. Again,
the parties are
how are you
oversaturated.
aware of the Gingrich campaign where essentially he had no money, but he was able to out-advertise his opponent because some fucking shadowy Koch brother super PACs were essentially like propping up a shadow campaign for the guy.
First of all, there's limited and tenuous evidence that corporate
is not tenuous
expenditures affect the outcomes of elections in large part.
They sway politicians. They sway fucking. There's what makes us a fucking corporatist nation, not an actual.
But you're
Corporate nation, because if we say it enough, maybe it'll become true. Just this idea on its head that lobbying should be illegal. It's like everybody's idea of what lobbying is you think that like some shady guy with a pack of cigars goes into some back. Like lobbying could literally be you've got like 3 guys who run corner stores in your city, and they decide to go and talk to the local mayor because they want like preferential tax treatment because they like sell things in off season something, right? Like that could literally that is lobbying, right?
Okay, but is that what's happening?
Yeah, but that's not the state of lobbying in the United States.
What do you think the state of law is?
I think my problem is who's going to hold more clout with swaying opinion. The 3 corner store owners or some fucking like mega corporation who's going to move in and like, hey, give me preferential tax treatment or like put me on this.
Samantha,
I'll open up a building in your fucking.
Samantha, in all honesty, this election cycle and this whole thing with Trump, were you more scared?
Lobbying is very good. It works. And it helps people have a voice that they wouldn't normally have, and it also like it has necessary disclosure. Like that's not really the issue. It's the contributions thing. I think that was the primary.
Well, I don't think. Well, then what? How do you know that it's an issue? You're saying it's an issue. Why do you know it's an issue?
What
Why are election communications and expenditures an issue in American politics?
I think that we have a right to know who our candidates are taking money from, and like, and also like.
Well, hang on. No, not taking money from. There's limits, and the Constitution and Supreme Court has said that it's okay to set limits on direct quid pro quo like contributions directly to the actual campaign. Of course,
FEC
we all have to abide by those. Correct. We all have
Yeah,
those
but super
things are-
PACs do not have this limit.
Super PACs
Well,
don't
they-
work with campaigns.
Right, they don't work directly. There's coordination in terms of, you know.
I think that's a world
the
record.
Messaging.
same
Let's
interest,
check
but,
it
you
out.
know,
It means that whoever
Soon may the